When random men try to bark at me online, and I bite back a little too hard. Sometimes I'm better off a bitch than just your little mouse. Cage dogs are always the most loud.
Hey y'all, welcome to the Scarlet podcast, your soon-to-be favorite podcast on aborting the patriarchy and the legal culture that will just not let go of it. I'm Emma, a millennial mom, artist, and a constitutional law nerd with a background in civil litigation. You can follow me at e.v.l.woman on Instagram and Threads, and TikTok for now, and at evilwoman, EVLwoman, no dots on Blue Sky. Be sure to subscribe and follow the podcast at Scarlet A Pod on Instagram, YouTube, and Spotify. Please also check out my Substack, Evil Woman Archives, at evlwoman.substack.com for more depth if you like my yapping. Huge shout out to Gwen Levey for the amazing music for this podcast with her song, Don't Have to Be. Please follow and support her work at Gwen Levey Music. I have a link to her GoFundMe in the description and in my bio should you wish to support a wonderful independent artist and women's rights activist. And with that, let's dig our heels in. Today we are joined by Gwen Levey. Gwen is near and dear to my heart. She did the music for this podcast. She's a country music star from Nashville, Tennessee.
Hey, I'm so honored to be on the pilot of your podcast. It's been a work in progress, and I'm so excited it's finally coming to fruition. As Emma said, I'm Gwen Levey. My band's called Gwen Levey and the Breakdown, and I wrote a pro-choice country anthem called Barefoot and Pregnant, which has over 16 million views now. I have been ruffling some feathers here in Nashville, very outspoken, not just about women's reproductive rights, but all the social justice issues that, you know, a lot of fellow creators like myself have been tackling before and also after the election. So Thank you for having me so much.
I wanted to get an idea of what reeled you into activism. Like I'm from Los Angeles, so Los Angeles, Tennessee, two completely different worlds. Like I know what reeled me into activism. I felt like I was raised in it. What reeled a country singer from Nashville, Tennessee into not just the reproductive rights landscape, but just in general into politics and activism?
I should say I kind of fell into country music. I obviously grew up with some country music, but I didn't grow up in the South. I grew up outside of Washington, D.C. We're very politically active. My dad, and mom were volunteering for the Obama campaign the first time around. And then that was the first campaign I was, involved with as well, knocking on doors, marching in parades for the campaign. I think my dad even, worked with Jerry Connolly. Coming from a politically active family, and my dad's also a political science major, so it kind of has just been in my blood. And country music, I've loved country music. My biggest introduction to country music was the Chicks, very outspoken against President Bush way back in the day, and I love their music, and I also love that they were so outspoken even from a young age, especially when you're a woman. You're not supposed to speak out politically when you're in country music. We see what happens all the time to artists that do that. And one of my favorite artists is Casey Musgraves, and she's managed to still have a career that borders on the line of country music because those are her roots, but also has expanded and has given her a platform to be more outspoken. And then another artist I admire who started off in country music is Maren Morris, and she was shunned by the country music community as well. So I feel like I'm in good company when it comes to females being outspoken in country music, but there's not a lot of us. Yeah.
No, there isn't. And I think that's why, I'll admit that coming from, born and raised Los Angeles, country music doesn't make my top 5 genres, that's never been my niche. There's always been notable exceptions to that. And it always comes from the unique or outspoken or just something that resonates with me about the music itself, about the lyrics, about the issues behind it, stuff like that makes it the exception for me. But when I heard Barefoot and Pregnant, I wanted to go buy some boots, and it was like, this is something. And I know we connected over a mutual love for Stevie Nicks and all that stuff. So music and art and just being a creator in the world of politics is so, I just think it resonates with people differently than just trying to, get the megaphone and get the issues out there and rile up the base and everything. Targeting people at
what speaks to them, what speaks to their heart, what speaks to their experiences, and just what inspires them through art and through music is so critical. It is just so critical. So I madly appreciate artists like you, and to withstand the backlash that, you guys receive in these niches are just, it's commendable. So we come from similar backgrounds. I didn't even realize this about, political upbringing and stuff, because my mother was also very involved. I remember the Gore campaign. I know that we're both the same age, or roughly the same age. So that puts me at kindergarten, working on the Gore campaign. And so my mom was very invested. She got her boots on the ground during Jimmy Carter's campaign. So, rest in peace, Jimmy Carter. But the other side of my family comes from a conservative, military, Christian, background. That's at least my dad's side of the family. And I don't have much to do with my dad's side of the family anymore. But my mom, being the single mom, is very much the black sheep of the family, the only child of divorce, stuff like that. And I clung to my mom, who was the feminist, and she worked on all these political campaigns. She was president of the Democratic Club in our region, stuff like that. So all the same things, knocking on doors. It was just always ingrained as part of my life, and I can't ever escape from it,
Yeah. So, once the fire is lit within you, you can't escape it. You're not going to be able to put it out. If you're truly invested in, as you were saying before, being an empath. I'm also an empath, and you can't not say something. You can't not do something.
Oh, in terms of being reeled into the activism, there's the activism aspect of it that, inspires me. And then there's the history and the legal philosophies around it that just will always challenge my brain, and will just always challenge me to think differently. And this is something that I personally geek out over. So this podcast is going to have quite a bit of that in it. But
awesome. Perfect.
Yeah. So what would you say? I know you do a lot of work with the Rise Above Justice movement. Can you tell us a little bit about that, and what cultural and legal hurdles you're hoping to accomplish through that movement?
So Rise Above Justice Movement is an organization I co-founded with Zachary Mallory, who's a fellow activist. And I'd say we've had so many social justice issues we focus on, but it's basically survivor directed. It's to uplift survivors and also allies of survivors. So you don't necessarily have to be a survivor of SA, DV, and it's just to bring people together in a safe space. And when we originally started working with people from the campaign, the Harris Waltz campaign, it was because she started off as a prosecutor who challenged sex crimes, etc. So highlighting those stories has been a huge part of Rise Above Justice movement. We've had Hadley Duvall, who, she spoke at the DNC, another very sad story, but she's, re-empowering herself by speaking out. So many people who are survivors, the Trump survivors, to push the fact that, yes, Donald Trump is a proven abuser. A lot of people he's appointing to his administration are as well. So that's a huge, huge part of Rise Above Justice movement. Obviously, LGBTQ plus rights, and, both me and Zachary are part of that community as well. Women's rights, minority rights. It just, basically it very much aligns with, the content that you make as well, Emma. So, I think it's just, like I said, a place to come and feel seen, heard, or just be there to feel safe.
Yeah. Seeing, heard, feeling safe, all of that is extremely important in the context of sexual abuse and domestic violence and all of sexual harassment, just the culture that we're in. And I mean, I've had some exposure to it on my end through civil litigation, sexual abuse, civil litigation. And it brought me down a rabbit hole in terms of how the common law around sexual abuse has shaped over the course of our country's history. Deep dives into, what were biblical interpretations of it? What were, even more historical interpretations of it? And the common theme is that, violations of our bodies have often been seen as a violation of property, but not as a violation of property because it's our property, a violation of property because it's a man's property. Whether you belong to your father at the time or a husband or whatever, that it wasn't rooted in our bodily autonomy. autonomy. It wasn't rooted in our integrity or how it damaged us both emotionally and physically. And that has been such a huge eye-opener for me over the years, and really explains a lot about how it is seen and how it is perceived as a crime. It is perceived as a very different crime than other crimes that we're used to going after. You know, we treat the victims of it completely differently. The legal system treats it completely differently. There used to be fight back requirements. You know, if you didn't fight back hard enough, they can't convict the person. I mean, it is just insanity to me how they have done more work, at least on the legal end of it, which shapes the cultural, like what I find so fascinating is like the way we interpret law and the way we use law will very much shape our cultural interpretations of the things that we use law to try to combat and try to bring justice to. If you are not prosecuting sexual abuse crimes, if you are, you know, giving lax sentencing, you know, a few months in jail for Brock Turner sort of type of thing, all of that sends a message to people that it's not going to ruin their life. We just elected somebody who was found liable for it, you know, and so it's not going. It ruins people's lives when it happens to them, and then it doesn't. And nobody is necessarily saying that we're out to ruin men's lives either. You know what I mean? Like, we would prefer it if men didn't do this, you know, if they respect, like, we're not looking for reasons to throw men in jail. We're not, the whole idea of false accusations, well, yes, it exists. You're never going to have a perfect system that's not going to involve some nefarious activity here and there. And I'm reading this book right now called Boy Mom, which is, you know, raising, because I'm a mom and I have a boy, my only child. And so like trying to raise, you know, like I don't want to raise any rapists, right? But like, that's not the only bar. Like, that's a bar in hell, in my opinion. Like, it has to be better than that. But at least, at the bare freaking minimum, raising somebody who, you know, values bodily integrity and just values consent and respects human dignity, you know, like that's a huge priority of mine, and something that I hope that through the podcast and through writing and stuff like that will shine some light on how do we maneuver in not just protecting our girls, because like I definitely want to protect the young women who are out here and the young girls and children and everything else. And I feel terrified on behalf of parents of girls, because I know that they're just so much more likely to suffer the abuse. Not that my boy wouldn't necessarily fall victim to something too, but, you know, my way of wanting to protect them is not raising somebody who's going to be a threat to them, you know? And so, and I think that is very heavy on the minds of a lot of parents these days in this world, as we see this massive backlash toward women, which is the only way I can explain it right now. We made a ton of progress, and now we are experiencing a ton of backlash. And so,
it was bad before the election, but I feel like it just got way worse. The comments that I know you've gotten, that I've gotten, it's just gotten way, way worse. So if people don't think this is an issue, I mean, you know, about the group chat of like 70,000 men talking about, oh, how can I abuse my wife or partner? You know what happened with Giselle P. I don't know how to pronounce her last name. I apologize, but shame.
France. Yep. Yeah,
the shame changes sides, because the shame, as you were saying, has been put on the victim, on the survivor. I've had, I've been sexually assaulted as a child. I've been sexually assaulted as an adult, both by a non-partner and a partner. And it does feel like you always get the brunt, because it's like, well, why didn't you talk about it? Why didn't you speak up? Why didn't you fight back? And it's like, well, the first time it happened, I was 6 years old, so I had no idea what was happening. And, you know, when I was older, it's like your body goes into these trauma responses where it just freezes. And so there's so many misconceptions. Part of another reason I wrote Barefoot and Pregnant, because I was thinking of all the young girls, the women who are assaulted that have no choice. Like, living in Tennessee with one of the most restrictive abortion bans is terrifying, because there's no exceptions. They say there's exceptions for the life of the mother, but I mean, you look at Allie Phillips, who ran for the Tennessee House of Representatives, who literally she wasn't sick enough, basically, because her daughter had fetal anomalies, was not going to survive. And so she had to go all the way up like 1,000 miles to New York, and her daughter ended up dying inside of her. And then Allie also got very sick and almost died as well. So it's like, these exceptions, there's really no exceptions, basically.
No,
So it's just,
basically it's not. No.
Yeah.
From a legal perspective, the exceptions don't exist. Jessica Valenti has a ton of articles about how the exceptions don't work, how they don't exist, and those are linked to all kinds of other sources. But essentially, you have a bunch of doctors and you have a bunch of hospital lawyers who are terrified of engaging in malpractice, and who are, on top of terrified of engaging in malpractice, don't want to go to jail, And so whatever you set or whatever you try to spell out in legislation is not going to translate to real world medical care the way it's needed in an effective and best practice manner. So it's legislators trying to act like they have a medical license. And in my opinion, is malpractice all on its own. Like, you shouldn't be dictating this kind of healthcare for anybody when you have no idea what the F you're talking about. You can't take it with any credibility. The exceptions don't work. And, Allie's case was a great example of that, along with, the other cases that were filed in that lawsuit of hers, out of the Zarowski case out of Texas, the cases out of Idaho. And you can see how much they have erased pregnancy as they have done so much work to erase pregnancy and the impact that it has on our bodies and our health, and focused all of their sources and all of their arguments on the unborn specifically. Like, you will notice that they never pull it back unless they're talking about regret, right? Mm-hmm. They will never pull it back to how it impacts women. And that is going to be the ultimate pitfall of it all, because it's women who will experience this. I tell people all the time, it's like, regardless of whatever momentum you're getting out of this movement right now, because you have the leverage of power, it's ultimately going to fail the culture war. Because if you think about it, you shut down all of the abortion clinics. People can't go in for the quote unquote elective abortions, which I hate using elective, and I will always use it in air quotes, because all abortions are elective unless they're emergency, like in the moment, a person is incapacitated and can't agree to it. Elective means you have agreed to doing it, regardless of what reasons behind that are. But if people aren't able to walk into a clinic and get the procedure done more on an at-will basis in their pregnancy, and you can't harass them outside and call them sluts and whores and whatever else, how are all of these cases going to end up presenting? They're going to end up presenting as emergency room visits for miscarriages. You're not going to be able to differentiate between a miscarriage and an abortion easily. Miscarriages are going to be investigated. Miscarriages will account for almost 1 in 4 pregnancies. But once you eliminate abortion out of, the outcome of pregnancies overall on an annual basis, you're looking at millions of people across the board. If this were to be, a national ban at conception or something, worst case scenario, you're looking at millions of people across the board presenting at emergency rooms and doctors being too scared to help them. And at that point, that is when people who are affected by it, as much as this movement has tried to erase them, the people who are affected by it, regardless of their political identity and everything else, are going to go, no, this is wrong. We can't function like this, regardless of whatever dogmas are around it, whatever ideologies or whatever. We're going to snap back. It's going to be like a rubber band, and snap back to, no, there's no place for the government to be involved in this in any sort of ethical or even rational basis. It doesn't make any sense. And so they're experiencing that pull of the rubber band as far out as they can. And I'm very confident it's going to snap back. I just don't know how long that will take or how much collateral damage there will be.
Yeah, there's another scholar about abortion rights. I can't remember. For some reason, can't remember her name right now, but she was saying she does believe that abortion rights will be reinstated, but it's just going to go a lot worse before it gets better. I think
it might have to. I think honestly, at this point, I think it might have to really shift the stage on it. As much as I hate to admit that, because I'm just I'm not somebody who wants things to get worse before they get better, but also, we've gone Roe v. Wade, 1973. Most of the women alive today have been in a post-Roe era, have taken how much safer pregnancy has been in that era for granted, and just think that, oh, well, the maternal mortality rate is this, that's not going to account for too much. I'll probably be fine. I'm like, the maternal mortality rate is that because we have better access to reproductive health care. And I still considered Roe v. Wade the floor. And much like Ruth Bader Ginsburg, criticized how they even decided that case to begin with. It wasn't secure in the long term. And so, I do think it will snap back. I'm interested to see how, because how is important in terms of how long that will last, because this is one of the most complex in terms of legal and ethical philosophy. This is one of the most complex issues out there, in my opinion. If you're really you're genuinely going to try to value life, and assume that it's not about, subjugating women and controlling women, but you really are truly about valuing life, it becomes a very complex topic. I think it's been something that, you know, even Sotomayor had said, this has been debated since like the dawn of time. You know, various religions take different stances on it, everything else. It is not something that you can compare to, you know, a more objective sense of morality. I don't personally believe in objective morality, but it's not something that there's just like a right answer to. So when I think about abortion, it's never something that I think of as right or wrong. I think of it as a morally neutral sort of topic. But, you know, we need to be able to have good faith discussions about it and talk about, you know, what happens when you have these kinds of laws in place, and, you know, the amount of people going out and getting sterilized because they just don't want to risk it. And these might be people who otherwise wanted children, but like they don't want to risk it. They don't want to expand their families, or they're suffering infertility from failed pregnancies because they didn't get good enough health care. It has a huge detrimental and, you know, just an existential impact on our species, on our cultures, on everything.
Because I just don't think they care about women.
No, I don't think many of them do. And even other women fall into that category, you know, and that is baffling to me. I can see how even people who would not even consciously be aware of animosity toward women can fall into those tropes and into those stereotypes and into those assumptions based on personal experiences, based on, you know, it's so nuanced. And that has been a huge eye-opener for me in recent years. But it really also explains to me a lot of the internal misogyny that exists in our culture. And so when people try to say, well, there's plenty of pro-life women out there, people go, how can you be a mother and be supported? I'm like, most of us who support it are mothers. Like, if you look at the actual demographics, like most moms are pro-choice. So what do you mean? How can you? Like, it's more common than not, you know? Right. And it kind of just breaking down a lot of those assumptions and a lot of those stereotypes is incredibly important to me in this new era, or whatever you want to call it, hellscape.
And you know, I like to reach across the aisle and talk to people who have different opinions, but I always say this election was different. This was not just like, oh, we disagree. This is like, wow, other Nashville artists reaching out to me and being like, why are you so angry? It just seems like you don't want anyone to disagree with you, blah, blah, blah. And I was just, you know, taken aback by that, because people can disagree, but like I said, it's a issue. And also, yeah, I'm angry.
Yeah,
angry.
Of course, I'm angry.
People I love are losing their rights. Our country is, you know, taking at least 70 years back when it comes to rights. And I've also had women who have shunned me too, that are, you know, I think they, maybe for their career or, you know, whatever, they bought into this idea that, oh, it's fine. Like, you know, as long as I have what I need, doesn't matter, like, about anyone else. That's just how it feels. You know, I know someone who voted Trump, a woman, and she was like, well, you know, my life isn't forever, so I want to be able to live the life I want. And it's like, wow.
Like, never in a million years would I have ever thought to vote in a way that only helps myself. You know, like, to just advance my own interests at the expense of other people's lives is just, I can't fathom it, you know? And that has been, we are a rather, you know, selfish and rather violent society. I mean, Americans are pretty violent people if you look at the scope of things in our history and everything. And individualism
founded was very violent,
yes. The rugged individualism of American ideology too. And that's also something that I find super important about getting into niches like country music, right? Because you come from places, you know, that I'm not going to personally relate to as well, because I'm born and raised in a metropolitan Los Angeles liberal, it's not a blue dot, it's like a blue sea of California, right? And with country music, though, and you look at like Midwest, you look at the South, you look at the cultures that surround that, they're very preoccupied with rugged individualism, the don't tread on me, you know, mentality. But then when it comes to them upholding the patriarchy, that kind of washes away, you know, and you really start to like see it for what it is, and just upholding white male power, white male privilege. And that's their idea of rugged individualism, fuck all to the rest. You know what I mean? Like,
and that's what we're seeing in the industry is, you know, I mean, we've had the bro countries phase, but I don't think we ever phased out of it. You know, it's still It's very much a male dominated industry, and I mean, I think less than 3% of women are what make up country radio. I think there is a huge amount of misogyny that's allowed to be in the country music world, and even on Broadway here in Nashville. You know, when people come visit Nashville, we have Broadway, and it's all the honky tonks, and you know, it's supposed to be really fun, but it really not only encourages drinking culture, because that's a huge part of Nashville, but a lot of the owners of Broadway, when Trump was reelected, posted and were rejoicing, because they were kind of the people that, like, you know, were anti you know, mask, anti-vax, anti-lockdown when all that was happening. They wanted to keep Broadway open. Like, one of the owners of one of the most famous bars on Broadway, Tootsie's, was threatening to like shoot people if they were gonna like come in and close down the bars. So there's that huge culture here in Nashville, which is country, you know, in mainstream country music. And unless you get outside into like the Americana world, it's almost like they try to dump like the more progressive country artists into Americana.
Yeah.
So it's like,
I've noticed some of that too. Like, I can kind of see, because I don't think I realized it until I was like, oh, it's not that I don't like country, I just prefer Americana. And I'm like, oh, that's why. You know?
Say country for me, but I'd probably be considered Americana, to be honest. I had success in mainstream country music with my my first album that came out. I was like pushing the line there, but it was nothing like I did with Barefoot and Pregnant. So I was getting on Nashville playlists with that album. But I had a champion there who was pushing for independent artists. And then during the pandemic, when the labels came in and bought up all the playlists and were dictating, you know, our artists can only go on the big playlist, which is how you get all these streams and new listeners. The guy left, and because he was like, okay, well, if I can't break independent artists the way I want, I'm going to leave Spotify. And he had broken Maren Morris and other artists like that. So once he left, my champion was gone. And I would say he definitely was more progressive in his viewpoints as well. I think he just probably got tired of it.
Yeah, you know, you can separate it off into Americana, you can separate it off into its own genre, but that doesn't really do it any favors, because it's just going to put them into their little boxes, you know, and that's detrimental. I mean, it
inhibits artists from being able to be themselves, be authentic, because artists who are gay, who are bisexual like me, and can't speak out because they're trying to do mainstream country music. Their team has been like,
they want to be canceled. Yeah, like
artist called Brooke Eden, and she's openly queer country artist signed to BMG, which is a big country label here, and she's been signed to them for years and hasn't had a huge hit on country radio, because a big part of that is the fact she's openly gay and has a wife and family, and then, you know, you see other artists that, you know, are gay, but they can't come out and say it, you know, because I know, because you've heard stories in town of people they've dated that they're actually gay, you know. So it's sad people have to hide themselves to be in mainstream country music. The way they have to hide their politics. It's very sad.
Yeah, it is sad. And like you look at this sort of conundrum that they get stuck in. It's like, yeah, if you want to stay in that niche, if you want to stay having any opportunity to promote your voice within that specific genre and specific section of the industry without getting dumped into a whole different genre and category, like say Americana, right? You want to stay in that, but then they have the leverage over how much they can platform you, right? So like, yeah, you might have signed on with this huge country label, but they're going to determine how much people hear you. And it ends up giving them more power. So it's almost like we need people to not just infiltrate on the creative front and making the content, but we need to infiltrate these areas that actually control how much it gets seen and heard, you know? Exactly. And I feel like that's a huge hurdle.
Yeah. And, you know, I'm a completely independent artist, and, you know, I used to be upset because Barefoot and Pregnant, while it opened a lot of doors for me, it also closed a lot of doors for me in the industry. And I used to be so upset because I'm like, well, I have no label, I have no formal management, blah, blah, blah. And really it's about funding. Like what a label does is gives you a big fat loan that you eventually have to pay back. And they have connections, and that's all well and great. But if I can stay independent as long as possible, the only thing I am missing are those connections and the financial backing. So what am I doing for this new album, this new music? I'm starting to GoFundMe, and it's like,
Yeah.
for money, it feels weird to me. But at the same time, what else are we supposed to do? Because, you know, not only am I a musician, but I'm a creator, and I'm not getting paid for this, and I don't make any money from streaming. So, you know, it's that kind of thing. And that's why the fact I'm grateful to have 100% control of my image, my music, what I want to say, my masters. I own 100% of my masters. A huge part of Taylor Swift's reason she re-recorded her music is because her first label, which is in Nashville, you know, sold off her masters before she had a chance to buy them. So I never have to worry about that by not having a label. But I want to, you know, continue to make waves and ruffle feathers here. But in a way that, you know, if I can be independent and do that and like not have a label, like how badass would that be? You know,
that would be incredible. And I hope that you build that following. Like, I'm gonna help you build that following. Because I mean, yes, having that independence and having that control over your image and, you know, tailoring your activism toward what you're most passionate about and everything else without having to get a stamp of approval from your record label or whatever, you know, forces are at play that, you know, hamstring what you're really trying to do with your music. Because like what I have gathered from you is that like the activism side of it, the awareness and the ruffling feathers is what is like at the core important to you through your music, like more than just the artistry of the music, even though the artistry of the music is obviously incredibly important and inspirational and everything else. Like the two are intrinsically connected, but it's the motive behind it. You know, when I heard Barefoot and Pregnant, like the initial reaction was somebody sat down and wrote this and put this out there. And the way it just hits, like that first time you hear it hit, you're like, wow. And that is like, I feel like I just want to bottle up that feeling, you know, because that's like the kind of feeling that will trigger how inspired somebody feels to actually get involved in a lot of these issues in one way, shape, or form, you know?
And that's exactly what I do with my platform, and give a voice to those that don't have one, you know? And yeah, it's been harder. I wish my first team had prepared me a little bit more for what it was going to be like to be so outspoken. But I'm proud of myself. And I know other people like yourself and, you know, other people I've been so fortunate to connect with through social media and other avenues. You know, I know that there's people supporting me. You know, I just have to remember that when it gets lonely in Nashville, which it's been feeling lately, you know, friends, you know, we're talking about friends that you thought were friends that aren't reaching out, you know, just like feeling isolated, you know, that's when I have to remind myself, okay, I'm not actually alone, even though it feels like sometimes. Yeah.
No, you're definitely not alone, and just we'll create, you know, that sphere of support and encouragement and everything else, you know, regardless of you know, record labels and everything. So please, listeners, like please, you know, I'll plug where to find your GoFundMe and everything. Supporting independent artists, independent journalists, independent whatever is going to be so crucial in this new era. That, you know, we are going to be yapping and singing and like expressing ourselves until they muzzle us. You know, like that's my philosophy.
We aren't a puppet of anybody.
No,
we control ourselves.
No. Absolutely not.
We're in a very unique position, I think.
I think we are too. We are too.
Yeah,
I think more so than from the feminists of like my mom's era, my grandma's era. You know, they were coming at issues from just saying, what we're doing isn't working. Women need rights. Women need autonomy. Women need to be able to have the self-determination and opportunities that men do, right? And then we transition into our generation and, you know, somewhat of our parents or older siblings' generation, but into the generation post-Roe, you know, women being able to have credit cards and bank accounts and buy their own homes and no fault divorce, et cetera, right? Mm-hmm. And you see the impact that it's had, how we have surpassed men in higher education, how more single women own homes than single men own homes, how, you know, we have, you know, expanded our careers and gotten into big industries and made tides in those industries and everything else. And you've seen that success, and we're riding on that wave. For them to like hold up a hand and stop it and try to send us back into the ocean, like back into survival mode. This is the generation that will not stand for that. Like we saw what we were capable of. So it's no longer like, oh, well, you couldn't do that if you wanted to, or women aren't built that way, or we have proof that we are. Like we have it now. It's there. It's been done. So you're going to try to take us backward, and that's where you're going to have to take us back kicking and screaming, like dragging us by the hair sort of thing. And that's just going to make you, the people trying to do this, look evil and cruel, and you'll really start to see where their motives lie. And that's why I think they'll eventually, even if it's not right now, as I hoped it would be right now, they will eventually lose the culture war on this front.
They will. It's inevitable. Like, I really do believe that as well. Just, especially when it starts impacting women that they love, or they supposedly love.
Yeah. I mean, I had my grandfather was a pretty classic patriarch, Christian, military man, whatever. He still sent his daughter through medical school. He still supported, he died while I was an undergrad in college, but he still wildly supported me doing what I wanted to do. You don't hold back and be like, anyways, like, Gramps, like, you're a feminist. I mean, he'd never admit to being one because of the cultural whatever around it. But it's like, no, yeah, you were. I mean, you wanted to see your daughters and your granddaughters succeed the same way as your sons and grandsons did. IMO, that makes you a feminist, So, like,
I think it's that age, so I listened to a podcast by NPR on Dolly Parton. I like Dolly. I've always enjoyed her. I especially loved her movies growing up, and didn't really get into her music until I was older. But I've always I do admire her. But one thing she did say in the podcast is that she's not a feminist, and she's years old. And I think it's the time she was, where that was like such an evil word, feminist, like you hate men. At the end of the interview, the interviewer was reminding her, like, well, you've done all these feminist things. You've lived your life in a very way. And she was like, well, I guess I've lived that way. So she was, kind of agreeing feminist without saying, oh, I'm a feminist, because she's led her life that way. And I think that's like literally the only way you can be. Just like, your grandpa didn't even realize he was one.
There was a partner at the law firm that I most recently worked at that I was there for many, many years, but the partner at this firm, and he would go off on many tangents or whatever when we would be chatting. You could not bill for the entire phone conversation you could have with him, because he just would go off on crazy tangents that it's just not ethical to bill the client for, right? But and he would say things like, oh, I'm not a feminist or whatever, but, and then it would follow with something that's like, oh, I think women should follow the law. And like, this was the same partner that would brag about how they were not an old boys club law firm, how, they had just as many female attorneys, and especially the Los Angeles office were led by female attorneys. He would brag about that. And I'm like, bro, you're a feminist, but he's also in his 60s. So it's like, that word carried a different meaning to that generation. And one of my goals in like this podcast and in my content and everything is to just kind of break down a lot of those stereotypes surrounding feminism. So,
and I will say, tying back mainstream country music, we're talking about the patriarchy. I think it's the definition of the patriarchy in music, because it's male dominated, and the way the people who are in charge it's very male dominated. And I think that's also something to think about too. Like, even Dolly Parton has to skate the line of, oh, well, I don't want to hurt anybody's feelings on either side. But at the end of the day, I mean, she's done that, but I think we're almost past that point where you can be, well, I don't want to say that, because it's an interesting time, because I think people are almost like having to speak out, in their music, and no matter what it is, like going against the grind in some way, like the days of being like, I have no opinion. I don't know if that's really going to last.
There's a lot of pressure for people not to do that anymore too. It's like, there's this, oh, you have a platform, you have a following, you have a moral obligation to speak out about certain things. And to some extent, I agree with that. There are certain times I think it goes too far, because I think people want to hear what they want to hear. And if they don't hear what they want to hear, now all of a sudden it's like, oh, well, maybe you shouldn't speak out about it. And so there's so much like bias and that surrounds it.
And actually, I talked to Saudi about that last night, like that experience of being so pressured to speak out about something that I was not educated enough about to speak out about.
Especially as like white women too. Like, I do not want to be the white woman that talks over marginalized groups or tries to act like I understand. Like, I make a very good faith effort to try to put myself in other people's shoes and to try to have as much real empathy as possible. And like the way, like, I teach my kid about empathy, and the way I try to, you know, help people understand what empathy is it's not a feeling, it's a skill, like logic, like communication, like anything else. It's a skill that you have to cultivate, you have to develop, right? You have to practice it. And so I see, like, I practice empathy. Like, I'm not affiliated with a specific religion or denomination or anything like that. But I would say that my faith is in the practice of empathy and trying to understand where people are coming from and trying to understand it from their eyes and their experience. And so the way I've, you know, tried to pass along that, you know, wisdom surrounding it is like, yes, empathy is going to make you feel a great many things. You're literally trying to feel how somebody else feels, right? But the feeling is not empathy. The feeling is the ability to do that, right? And so when you say things like, well, if it were me versus if I were them, they're very different contexts, because if I were them, the I in that and the them in that, they're people with feelings and circumstances and situations to consider, and are a complex, it's a complex variable. If it were me, that it is not a person, that it is something that you assign yourself to. And so you're always going to see things from your lens if you think about it in that sense. So when it comes to marginalized groups and, you know, the various atrocities that we're seeing globally and everything else, trying to put myself in an if I were them position and learn from that position and learn from countering positions and everything else, that's going to take a lot more than a knee-jerk reaction to whatever the issue is that's going on. You know, I will have my knee-jerk visceral reaction to something, but should I express that immediately and then try to retract because I regret it later, because I've, you know, maybe shared the wrong information, or maybe because I interpreted it differently, or maybe because I just don't have as much knowledge on it as I should. I need to do more research. I do not want to be the white woman that talks over the people actually suffering. Like, I come from a place of having a considerable amount more privilege than, you know, other people.
Absolutely.
And that's not to say life hasn't been hard. You know, a lot of people try to say, well, my life was hard, I'm not privileged. I'm like, no, your skin color never made your life harder. Okay. Your life could have been a disaster, but your skin color didn't make it harder, you know? And so that's the mentality that I come from. And so I try to be very conscientious about that and listen to the people suffering from it, to try to understand where they're coming from versus trying to speak over them. And that's going to inundate the content just so that I could get a gold star of approval from them. Like, that's not what I'm looking for, you know?
Absolutely. It's interesting because we are in 2025 and we shouldn't have to think about, oh, my skin color compared to someone else's, but we still have this racism and misogyny and bigotry that's so ingrained in our culture that we haven't faced yet and fully healed from, and actually, you know, taking the steps to give back to those communities that have been so harmed by what our country was founded on. Used to be founded on. And being with Marcus, so being in an interracial relationship, has opened my eyes in a lot of ways too, because the way society just, you know, zones in on someone who's Black or you're a woman and the way you get treated. We've had conversations about that. And I know we know this, but like, the white privilege is astounding. It
is very important to recognize how just everything that we have was built in some way, shape, or form on the backs of enslaving people and genocide and just the horrific acts. I mean, we are such a violent culture from the roots. That's a reckoning that we definitely need. You have let's just pivot the topic slightly before we close. You have a new album coming out. I know the song for this podcast is on it, but is there anything you want to highlight about the new album and stuff, like going into the next wave, Trump era, Trump 2.0?
Yeah, I think, you know, the fact this album is so DIY, the way I'm independent as an artist, says a lot. You know, obviously I said a lot with Barefoot and Pregnant, but, you know, I've stepped away from my former team and they're awesome, but I feel like I can only go so far. In this case, you know, Marcus is helping me produce the album. So it's his first time producing, and it's just been actually because of the podcast song Don't Have to Be. It started our artistic collaboration. And who knew that we could, like, you know, not only like be in love, but also like work so well together musically. Something we didn't want to jump into right away. I think, you know, we're kind of like dancing around the fact like we're both musicians and writers and can work together, but we weren't pushing it. And so it just happened in such a natural way because you asked us to do the podcast.
Oh, I'm so glad. one of the reasons was because I had shared your Barefoot and Pregnant song, and you had replied to that saying, thank you for sharing, heart. But because you did that, my reply wouldn't go into like your hidden like inbox or whatever. And so when I replied, I was like, I feel like this is my best shot at like actually entering the DMs of like an up and coming artist. And if I could get like a song or a snippet or even just use a snippet, anything like that'd be fantastic. So I'm so glad that it actually had like a positive effect for you too, because it was something I was like, oh my God, she responded to me, and was, yeah. Anyway.
And it's literally one of my favorite songs on the album. So I'm so excited about it.
Good.
It's all about being who, you want to be. It doesn't sound what society tells you, and, smashing that patriarchy, just like breaking free of it, basically.
Breaking free of it. Yeah. Without having to be like, oh, honestly, if I wasn't with an amazing guy and already had a family and everything else, I would probably be joining 4B movement, writing off men, sort of like, I totally get it. But also, like, I've never been, even as a married woman, like I've always been against marriage. And I know that like, that's like something that it's just like, well, then why don't you get married? Like hypocrite sort of thing. And I'm like, well, there were specific reasons why we got legally married. But like the whole institution of it, I never agreed with, and never thought that like just the cultural history around it and everything was anything that was supportive of like women's self-determination, everything else. So just being able to have a song and just a thing that like you can still be who you want to be. You don't have to be this conventional version of this, but you can also you can have your family, you can have your partnership, and you can have your life, and you just don't have to conform to these toxic notions that are imposed by the patriarchy for the purpose of power. And that was my whole thing about getting married. And we got married on our 10-year anniversary. So I was just like, we're already basically married. Like everyone's going, oh, you finally did it, So
we're like, we don't have to get married. We don't really need it. I think we have so many wonderful friends that are getting married, and I'm so happy for them. But I think when Marcus and I get married, it's going to be like, okay, it's about damn time, right?
It's about damn time. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. That was us too. Everyone was like, okay, finally they did it. I think everyone was like, oh, is she so firm in her convictions that she won't even marry Nate? Like, we've been with him since she was 16, like it was,
the parents, but we've come from, both our parents have been together like 40 plus years, which is super rare because, the divorce rate is so high. But, Marcus's parents were together since high school and that kind of thing, and they're still together. And I know that our families are very progressive, but they have a very traditional view of when it comes to family. And my mom's always like, you should, get married before you have any children, just to protect you, and all this stuff. And I'm like, yeah.
So it kind of had this weird blend of more traditional, like, interpretations of marriage, and like having this sort of, at least at its face, like traditional marriage, but also come from a highly feminist and progressive, like, ideology, point of view, just way of life in general, that confuses a lot of people. Like, it confuses a lot of people. Like, I'm a huge outspoken advocate for stay-at-home moms, and they go, but you're a career woman. What do you mean you're a huge advocate for stay-at-home? I'm like, because it's work and it's unpaid and it's exploited constantly. Like, hello, and so
thing, like, you haven't been able, they don't give you the rights because you weren't the one working, but you were working. Yeah,
exactly. And so, like, I feel like I confused quite a bit of people, and they go like, I'm not really sure, like, where she comes from in terms of blah, blah, blah. I'm just like, I'm just trying to break down the patriarchy, y'all. Like, I'm just trying to break down these conventional norms and whatever that are trying to put you into little boxes. You can live your life however it makes sense for you to live your life. I just want to make sure you're not exploited and you're not, subjugated, and you can, make decisions about your own self-determination and stuff. And blah, blah, blah.
Yeah,
so that's what this is all about.
The whole point is, like, you can be a trad wife if you want. It's all about choice. Yeah. I
mean, I have no issues with the trad wife lifestyle. It's more when they like try to push that onto like other things and like platform it as like, this is the way to be. I'm like, you don't need to do that. Like, you can live that way if it makes sense to live that way. Like, fine. But like, it also contributes, the more you try to push it for other people, or try to be like, this is the way it needs to be. You're less of a woman if you're not, and blah, blah, blah. That's the kind of toxicity that like carries the water for the patriarchy, So like, if if one parent staying home and taking care of the house and taking care of the kids and everything, if that works for your family, I know many families that works fabulously for, do it. I just want to make sure you're protected. Like when the president of Mexico said that women over 65 and older were getting pensions regardless of whether they worked because of all the labor that they did. I was just like, yes. Queen. Like I just give that woman a crown. Like I was like, that is the point, like I don't want you to suffer for that, because you didn't make, because you didn't choose to have a paid working profession, because there's no mom that doesn't work. Yes. We all work. It just depends on if you get paid for it or not, if you're used and abused around it or not, or whatever. But, I could go on forever about that. I don't know time, but future episodes.
Yeah. The possibilities are endless.
I know the possibilities are truly endless. But one thing that I do definitely want to promote on this platform and this podcast is a call to action for activism in whatever way, shape, and form that somebody feels most passionate about. Because that's where we get our most inspiration from. It won't feel like a chore. It won't feel like it's just, when you put your boots on the ground, you want to march, you want to run, you don't want to shrug along going, oh, I got to do this, right? Yeah. And a very important aspect to that is picking stuff. And I think especially in this culture war that we're in, and this just stark divide between left and right and partisan politics and everything else, is focusing on issues you care about, policy implementation that you care about, regardless of political affiliation. For example, I do work through Chamber of Mothers, which is a bipartisan coalition of mothers who are very progressive in terms of ideology on, what policy they try to root for. Like 99% of the time, that's going to align with left-leaning candidates. Maternal health, women's health, paid leave, universal childcare, stuff like that, right? And that's important to me because it brings in and helps me connect with people who might not be as left aligned as I am. They might be moderate, they might be more conservative, but they realize that these issues are really important and this speaks to them. And this is something that we can bridge a divide between us at a micro level. And by wiping away some of the partisan aspects to it, the Democrats and the Republicans, I call them. But yeah, you can, once you assign this political party affiliation, people just go, rah, I don't want anything to do with the other side or whatever. But when you focus on policy,
just because you're Republican, like I know Republicans that didn't vote for Trump because this, like, I think people are like, oh, you hate Republicans, everybody just because they're Republican. I'm like, no. It's people who don't have morals, like MAGA.
Yeah, exactly. And honestly, most of my, I don't like to use the word hatred, but most of my just disgust and like
frustration
and anger, right? Just anger, right? Is directed at the people in power more than their followers, because there are a lot of their followers can fall into many different groups and categories. And the people in power are the ones that I'm just seeing in this, like, I can't rationalize any reason why you're doing any of this except for exploit and nefarious intentions. And that's something that I can't stand that. And so like when I talk about Republicans, when I talk about Democrats, I'm usually talking about like people who hold some sort of like power and leverage within the system, as opposed to like the followers of like, when I refer to the followers, I refer to them as, progressives or like left-leaning folks or whatever, depending on, or moderates or conservatives. Or that's usually when I'm like talking about the followers. When I'm talking about Republicans or Democrats, I'm talking more about the people in power. And so that's why I'll call them Republicans, because I'm like, all of you. I can't name very many of you that I'm even remotely okay with, but all right. But like calls to action and activism and just getting involved in one way, shape, or form and something and issues and stuff that really make a difference to people. Personally, you're involved in Rise Above Justice. So I'd like to, if there's anything else you want to speak on Rise Above Justice movement, I definitely want anyone listening to go check out that platform, follow that page. If that's something you're interested in getting involved in, please do, because we really need to build up these coalitions and build up these spaces for people.
Absolutely. And, if you want to get involved, I mean, for us, you can go to just DM us and we'd be happy to, get you towards those resources, some that Emma said. And yeah, we're just, I think now is the time to unite as much as we can and be there for each other and know that we're not alone, because it can be a very lonely time to feel,
It is. It can be a very, very lonely and isolating time if we retreat. Try not to retreat.
Yeah,
there was an initial response to the election that just like, I just wanted to be a turtle and hide. Like, it was just like, and then
that called me and he was like, so you still in? And I was just like, yeah.
Yeah, I know. And it's a scary time. It's an uncertain time. All of it is, we're in for a ride, like buckle up, buttercups, and, but we're in it together. And I'm so thankful for you and for the song and for coming on. And I just, I think we'll get through this one way or another. We get through this, we survive. We may not feel like we're thriving, but we'll be surviving, and we'll push on, boats against the current,
And same to you, grateful for you. And I'm really excited for you. It's a way of empowering yourself and others.
Yeah. And however successful it ends up being, but I feel like we need voices out there. We need some perspectives. We need some spaces for people from all different ends. And I feel like there's just certain parts of my life and experiences and whatever that in one way, shape, or form might be resonating with somebody who might not otherwise feel like they belong in feminist circles or belong in progressive circles. So I want to grab and pull and be like, you're welcome here,
Have that degree and experiences as a law scholar. So I think that says a lot, and people will listen.
Yeah. It's that's definitely always been a huge fascination of mine and just a passion of mine in general. But being able to apply that and bring awareness to how that shapes much of our social culture, not just our legal culture, is kind of critical right now when we're talking about who's in charge of that legal culture and who pulls the strings there. So
absolutely.
Anyway, all right. Well, thank you so much for being on. Please follow Gwen if you don't already. Gwen Levey Music. I will be plugging. I'll be plugging your handle and everything else on this. And welcome on anytime. And I'm so happy we launched this. Thank you.
Me too. Congratulations.
Yay!
Yeah.
All right. Bye, everyone.